Well, here we are, and welcome to My View from the Piano Bench. We do this on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Often. Sometimes it flexes. I do my best. Here on my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel, in addition to Piano for My Friends on Thursday evenings. So on Wednesday evenings, I just kind of dive into experiences and perspectives and talk about stuff. On Thursday evenings, I focus on playing, move the camera, the phone closer in Wednesday evenings so I don't feel like I have to shout, but for some reason I feel like I'm shouting now. But you'll hear me better if I don't. Yeah. Anyhow, thank you to those of you who support and encourage me via the links you will find on the support page of my website, and you'll see a link to that page in the video description below. Each week I have a topic, and I'm going to play off of last week. Last week when I talked about the Sun Valley Jazz and Music Festival, primarily one particular experience of it, but I referenced the entire thing. I may come back to it. But this week I want to go back to the prior week and talk about something about the Jazz Festival weekend in Rehoboth. And the way this was set up for me, and the fact that we had to fly out to Sun Valley Wednesday morning, which meant that I was, going over things with Sharon at her house, her and Sean's house, on Tuesday night, staying up late, getting 3 hours sleep, going to the airport early and all of that. So, and I came back Monday from Rehoboth. So it really felt like one continuous thing. Often those two festivals, the Jazz Festivals, plural, in Rehoboth, and the Sun Valley Festival are on the same weekend. This year, thankfully, they were on consecutive weekends, but it made for a long haul, of which I'm not really fully recovered, even though I've been home for a week. Oh my goodness. But anyway, back in the saddle again, or slack in the battle again, perhaps. So this week I'm calling the topic Build-A-Bear. Now when you saw the topic, if you did before you watch this, you probably had no idea I was going to talk about the festival weekend in Rehoboth. And let me clarify that first. Most of you know, but I have to be really careful because there's political sensitivity involved here. The Rehoboth Beach Jazz Festival has been around, I think, 35 plus years, and it's well known around here. But along the way, it has changed hands. It's been some time, and the festival taken in a different direction. And people who felt left behind by the direction it took basically say it's not a jazz festival anymore. They do have smooth jazz, but they also have R&B and all sorts of other things. I think last year or 2 years ago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears was one of the headliners. And this is a common thing that's happening to jazz festivals in order to keep them in the broader, larger public acceptance. But as far as what jazz is, as understood by people who are fans of particular stripes of jazz in particular, that's not a cool thing. So 11 years ago now, a competing jazz festival came up to represent what the Rehoboth Beach Jazz Festival used to be in the past, and that's called the True Blue Jazz Festival. And although they took some criticism for it, they run it on the same weekend. And people are still confused by it, but from my perspective, they had to run it on the same weekend because it's one of those events that you do in a resort area in the off season, so people come for it, and that's the weekend that people come for jazz in Rehoboth. So they really had to compete on that turf. And of course, what I do is much more represented by True Blue. So for most of the years, I've been kind of heavily involved in it in some form. Being heavily involved in it, though, is different from how deeply heavily I was involved in Sun Valley. That's a big immersive experience. The Rehoboth Festival is kind of an amalgam of what the headliners are at the festival and what all the local establishments will do. And you can go to restaurants and have jazz all over the place. It's a little different than some of the other jazz festivals. And they're all really different from each other and how they run. In Rehoboth, how True Blue does it is they actually, I don't want to say control, but administer some of the venues that aren't really like headline festival events and aren't ticketed or anything, but you can go and see local artists. And that was a part of what I did. Also, there are venues, restaurants that do it completely on their own and aren't technically attached to either festival. I was a part of that. I could qualify what I said about that particular restaurant, but I won't because that description I think is cleanest. And then there are actual festival events, ticketed headline shows, and I was involved in one of them as well. So when I was down in Rehoboth, I had one gig per night. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which actually is the lightest for me since I've been involved in the True Blue. Because of how things used to be structured, which have changed this year, it was easy for me to pick up multiple events, and some days 3 and other days 2, but then that made it convenient for me to stay down there and all of that. And I was a semi-commuter. It was kind of crazy what I did this year, but long setup, 4 events. Thursday night, the headline show featuring Paula Johns. Friday night, an outdoor club restaurant kind of thing, the Blue Hen in Rehoboth, on the backside of the Avenue Inn. And weather permitting, we do it outside, and often musicians will come and sit in. And that's a destination. People know it's happening, and True Blue sponsors that. And I did that on Friday. On Saturday and Sunday, the restaurant Just in Time has a long history of being involved in Jazz Festival Weekend and having music. 2 different bands I played with. But the common denominator between all of them is that in the rhythm section, or just being the rhythm section, depending on the gig, was Mike McShane on drums and myself on the piano, the keyboard, not the acoustic piano. All 4 completely different groups. Now, why did I say Build-A-Bear? And I actually intended to talk about Build-A-Bear first before I described what I did, so you kind of can put this together already. I was introduced a few years ago to Build-A-Bear by a friend, and some people are really into it, especially with young kids. Most shopping malls apparently have them, and when I was poking around recently in a shopping mall, there was one that's still happening, and custom stuffed animals, basically, largely teddy bears, not entirely. And you can pick your animal, you can pick your accessories, and then you take it to the big, looks like popcorn machine, right, to have it stuffed. So what's the primary ingredient what's the central ingredient? What's the foundational ingredient in the Build-A-Bear? What comprises, 80% of or more what goes on there? What makes them all similar, even if they appear differently? And it's that stuffing, right? So you're putting different shells or casings or whatever on the bear or on the animal. And that's kind of what my relationship with Mike McShane has evolved to down in Rehoboth. And it started roughly 15 years ago, give or take. when Sure Jazz, a long-standing institution in Rehoboth, and I think at one point actually a nonprofit educational foundation that sponsored events and stuff, jazz related, uh, with a particular musician who was in charge of it, Lenny Grazier. And not long before I became visible on that scene or aware of musicians are starting to intersect down in Rehoboth, Lenny passed away. And so there was a bit of a vacuum-ish when I came on the scene, and eventually I became the keyboard player for Sure Jazz, which is much busier than it is now. Sure Jazz on Holly Lane. And I just draw an analogy in my head, or a comparison, which is not exactly accurate, but it works. It does remind me of when I found myself living in Elkton, Maryland, and playing the showboat in Atlantic City 6 days a week, something I never had planned to do. And often I was down there in Atlantic City 7 days a week for like a year. And Elkton, Maryland is 2 hours away from Atlantic City. It was a long commute, there and back and there and back, and usually I made the commute. And in Rehoboth, when I came on the scene, I guess I was going down there 3 or 4 nights a week. Not quite as long, an hour and a half, but in a way it feels longer because, well, I can't say that, because from Elkton to Atlantic City, you can, and I typically did, take more of a, not a back road way, but not a highway way. And when you're going to Rehoboth from here, where I live, it's just all 2-lane roads. You know, when you drive at night, you got to drive real slow because who knows what's going to run out in front of you and all of that. And, you know, squirrel is one thing, a deer is another. Fortunately, we don't live in Maine and could hit a moose. That's, where did that come from? Only because I have heard that if you are driving in Maine and you hit a moose, you're toast. If you hit a deer, the deer is toast and your car might be toast, but you're typically not toast. Anyway. So what was I talking about? I did make reference last week when I did these videos. I was really tired, and a nice person pointed that out. Like, don't push yourself too hard. But I missed 2 weeks of videos, so I went ahead and did it. And I'm kind of not entirely recuperated for different reasons. I can't think straight today. Why do I tell you this? I guess to cover for myself that I can't think straight or speak straight. So anyhow, I'm talking about Sure Jazz and the relationship that I developed with Mike McShane, the drummer, where eventually we condensed ourselves into a 2-person rhythm section. And it came at a kind of a critical time because not long before I met Mike, I had myself pretty well talked into selling my keyboard and never playing a keyboard again. I knew it would be limiting my gigs, but I also knew that, you know, there were still opportunities to have gigs on acoustic pianos. And I talked about this in previous videos, but I may bring it up again, you know, why the keyboard versus the piano is such a different thing. You know, it's not like 2 stripes of the same thing. It's a, you know, Mack truck and a tricycle, kind of. Now, I could really make some people upset when I say that, but I'm writing a note for myself. Keyboard versus acoustic piano. I probably won't be able to read that later. But anyhow, I start doing these gigs with Mike, and I start using the ability of the keyboard to play left-hand bass, right? And, you know, of all the drummers I play left-hand bass with, I find, not that I do it a lot, in fact I don't at this point, but when I have, I find the most intuitive connection I have is with Mike. You know, and Mike in my left hand, who sometimes is named Jocko in Rehoboth, Mike and Jocko, you know, can really, really lock in. So I succumb, and it's like, you know, hey, it's a thing. You know, the funny thing is in Rehoboth, I seldom play this. Away from Rehoboth, I always play this just about. So in Rehoboth, everyone knows me as the left-hand bass keyboard player. Everywhere else, yeah, I'm a piano player, but don't ask me to sing you a song because I want to keep my job. Anyhow, so then what would happen is that there would be this branch off from Sure Jazz, where Mike and I would work with somebody else in front of us. Now with Sure Jazz, it's John Ewart on horn and often Holly Lane singing. But we found ourselves working with any number of people. I won't go into a bunch of names. But it just became a kind of convenient thing to sort of rotate the people in front. But when you change the person in front, you actually change the group. Or at least the center of gravity of the group. And it was amusing to me that how the 4 gigs worked out. And it's kind of like this anyway every year in Rehoboth. I always work with Mike, but it's just like 4 completely different arrangements on those 4 nights. And that was just ridiculous and cool. And on Thursday night, for the ticketed event, for the opening headline show for True Blue Jazz, it was configured that I was leading the band to back up Paula Johns. And Paula Johns is an excellent, fantastic vocalist and entertainer from Philadelphia, and I've known Paula for a long time. And we really enjoy working together. And I was recruited to help put this together. And I actually didn't know that it was represented as my group until I saw the promo. Paula Johns and the Joe Holt Trio. And of course, 2 of the members of the trio were Mike McShane and myself. Right? And this time we had the opportunity, Mike and I, to decide what we wanted to do. And we eventually landed on doing something novel for us, which is booking an actual bass player. Which is good. It's good in a lot of ways. One, it's good because that's what an acoustic jazz trio typically looks like with an upright bass player. It's also good because, as fun as it is to play left-hand bass, it does tie one hand behind my back. Think about what happens on the keyboard. Like if I'm playing. Difficult to play when I have to think about things. I'm thinking about trying to portray something. And what I did was I played primarily a left-hand bass related thing, but in such a way that it would sound ridiculous on the keyboard. Because on the keyboard you have to pick a split, a hard split, where underneath that you choose the instrument you want, which is going to be some kind of bass sound, and above it you do something else, a piano sound or something. So it sounds like 2 distinct instruments. But if you bleed over, all of a sudden the piano is going to sound like a bass, and if you go up, all of a sudden the bass is going to sound like a piano. And in my Dave McKenna influenced world, it's really one unit. I'll stop there. I know you can't really see my hands the way I have this configured. But when you're playing piano like that, you don't have to divide your brain. And you don't always have to constantly play the left-hand bass, although often I will. But even so, the two hands working together challenge the idea that you have to have two separate things going on, if that makes sense, because there is no defined split in the piano. So when I'm playing left-hand bass, my left hand cannot help my right hand, and neither can my right hand help my left hand. I have to do the lobotomy in my head, right? And then the left hand. It's just doing that. So anything that has to do with playing the piano with two hands has to happen with one. It's kind of challenging and sometimes annoying, but I can do it, and it's kind of a signature with me, kind of a calling card. But to have a bass player means I get my left hand back, which is all kind of fun. And what was also really fun is being able to call my friend Tom Baldwin to come up from Laurel, Maryland, where he lives, greater D.C., in the kind of gap between D.C. and Baltimore. I was careful, I said Baltimore correctly, because my family's from there, and Baltimore is what comes out of my mouth. Why am I corrected the problem, and then I told you I had the problem. Baltimore. But it's really not a problem. Maybe I'm proud of it. That's what it is. Anyhow, Tom Baldwin was able to come up from the gig, and so I had these three musicians, Paula, Tom, Mike, each of whom I've known for a long time. Mike actually the shortest. I probably met him in 2005. I probably met Tom Baldwin very late 90s. I met Paula Johns in Atlantic City in the early to mid 90s. Just about all of them a long time. And their orbs have never crossed. And I love being able to do that. So we have three players with me. I'm the common denominator between the three of them, and they don't know each other. And a lot of that just has to do with geography. In my local / regional area, the way it's worked out for me is I can cover a pretty wide area, because I spent half my life in the greater Philadelphia area and half my life down here in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which kind of connects you to Baltimore, Washington, also connects you to the Delaware beaches. And so Rehoboth is kind of like my other small pond, and I have the small pond that I live in Kent County around Chestertown, Maryland. And being connected in three different geographies that don't always intersect, basically DC Baltimore is its own world, Philly is its own world, and Rehoboth can be its own world too. Kind of getting into the small pond own world, but yeah, and here where I live is also can be its own small pond world. And even for that time that I stopped traveling, because those of you who know me know that in different phases of my life there have been different stripes of how I've been able to have experiences playing around the country, always in the country. Never played internationally. There's no really aspirations for that, but it's nice to be able to move around. There's so much to see in this country, right? But even when that slowed down heavily for like 10-15 years, it's starting to pick back up again. There's still this diversity of cultures and experiences for me, because there's this, and sometimes I'll spike up to the Boston area and I'll spike around. And sometimes I'll stay overnight places, but usually it's just long commutes everywhere, right? But I get to work with Paul, I get to work with Tom, I get to work with Mike, but now they get to come together. And that's always something that is intriguing to people. It's like, how do you do it? Well, like what was I talking about last week with Jim Martinez, when I had that 2-piano set at Sun Valley Festival, and because I was coming from a band set, I got to the venue for the 2-piano set 10 minutes before start. That's when I had my first conversation with Jim. And it's kind of like not a big deal for musicians to just drop in and go, but it just isn't a big deal. But it's always, very often, a big deal to the public. Especially not musicians who are just looking at us and trying to figure us out in all kind of ways, and so I allow that to be. Not that I overhype it or anything, but I know it's a thing, and so I kind of acknowledge that thing, and when I had the Mainstay Monday shows, I'm thinking about this today, and parenthetically, because in a couple of days I'll be doing another First Friday show. And I'm thinking about how I'm doing that. And I'm going to do something different to open the show this week at the Mainstay. And, I can think ahead, or kind of plan what I'm going to say and how I'm going to approach things. And I'm going to do something that I haven't done in all my shows. I'm going to say in like 230 of these shows, this is the first time I've, what I'm going to do. And, I've had a lot of experience thanks to that, bringing musicians together. That's one of the things I like to do. Like, this person meet this person, shows in 20 minutes, here we go, right? Now, that works when you have strong musicians. It's a part of the thing. You know what you're doing, you know the language, you drop in. And I in particular knew that Paula and Mike were really going to enjoy Tom. And they did. When Tom was laying it down, and Paul was very observant, but then when it came to the first bass solo, Paul was like, whoa, this is during the gig, because we had a run through, but you don't rehearse solos and stuff, right? Hopefully you just know how to do it, and I knew that Mike was like really enjoying, just Tom just laying it down. And to whatever extent I can do Jocko here, to whatever extent, let's say I'm the best person in the world who can do it. Just to say it. That doesn't mean that playing with a real bass player isn't a better experience for everyone, really. And it was really fun, because I was setting this up, by who was on the gig. It was a given that Paul and Mike would be on the gig, but then pulling Tom in, and then Tom was just like, that was his first experience with the freight train of Paula John's, and it was really cool, and that set up the weekend for me. So on Friday, it's like, okay, back to normal, back to me running left-hand bass. Now, when you have a two-person rhythm section, it opens up avenues for you, because the music business is really tight to have larger bands. And unless you're an established band doing an established thing. When I was out in Sun Valley with the Madeira band, we had 7 pieces, and there were like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 musicians on stage together all the time in different configurations. But you've also got a lot of resources behind that. Typically the working musician, it could be a difference between a quintet, which restaurant's not going to have the money for unless you really want to work cheap. A quartet, typically not. Trio, yeah. Duo, if you can go from trio to duo, and then so nobody's safe. I'm probably the safest, being the piano player, because I can play in all these configurations. But I can play a duo with a bass. I played zillions of duos with bass players in other scenarios. And now the bass player's not safe. And I do realize that I cost bass players some gigs. And then people will say to me, well, you're filling the role of 2 instruments. Aren't you paid double? I said, well, if I were paid double, then the whole idea of doing it's negated, right? So anyway, Friday night in Rehoboth, back to having Jocko. and having what some, if not many, who know him consider the best living bebop saxophonist on the planet. And if he's not that, he's in the top tier for sure. But one of those other saxophonists who works with Vince Lardier and knows him well says that about him. And so I take it and run with it. You know, best living bebop alto player on the planet, but great player. And I had such fun, you know, and there is a certain freedom for me being able to have control of everything in the rhythm section save the actual percussion. You know, so what's happening with the bass player and what's happening with the piano player coming out of the same brain. It reminds me of the interview that Rick Beato did with Sting a couple of years ago, maybe, or maybe less. But anyway, semi-recently, and he talks about, because he's both the singer in his band and he's the bass player in his band, he's a total control freak. He controls what the melody is, and he controls what the harmony is. Because, like, you could have, you know, all kind of different chords. Boy, that sounds like a train coming through town, doesn't it? Woo. But then, what you put underneath of it really defines what it is. And I forget the notes I played already, so we won't go there. Let's play this. That's one sound. That's another sound. Right? That would be like a D minor 11 chord. That would be an F6-9. They're not exactly the same. In fact, they actually have different functions and can go different directions just for moving the bass note. So it's fun to do that, and it's also just fun to connect with real great musicians, and I lead the blessed life. Anyhow, so that was Friday's gig, and now Saturday and Sunday we're at a restaurant where Mike typically gets either one or two nights during Jazz Festival weekend. Typically one, just because he's so busy, but last year and this year he got two. And this restaurant, I think, actually was doing jazz on Jazz Festival weekend before there was a Jazz Festival weekend, or right as it was starting, and was a part of that whole thing. We don't make an association with the original Jazz Festival. We just say Jazz Festival weekend. And I think he understands, and a lot of people now understand, that there's the two distinct festivals and kind of the politic of the competition between the two of them, or whatever you would call it. So we have 2 nights, 2 completely different groups. Now let's work backwards. On Sunday night, Holly Lane and Sure Jazz. Now Holly Lane and Sure Jazz is not nearly the freight train of a busy enterprise that it was 15 years ago when I came on the scene. And it was even busier before I came on the scene. And part of that's a culture change and all of that. But is it still, like, in the big picture, the heavyweight sort of, tradition leaning, jazz thing in Rehoboth? Sure it is. And Holly has a gigantic following, and they love her in Rehoboth, and everybody knows the guys in Sure Jazz. And because Mike had those 2 nights, just in time, he could put in what he wanted. And he chose correctly, a no-brainer. Okay, one of those nights is going to be Sure Jazz. It's going to give Sure Jazz a prominent spot in the gig, in the festival, or in the weekend. Last year, Sure Jazz was actually doing an event, the last 2 years before this year, that was sponsored by True Blue. This time, True Blue did not sponsor Holly Lane and Sure Jazz, but that's the other angle of this festival. Unlike Sun Valley, that all the businesses in town kind of just get in on it, or a lot of them. Uh, Maybe not as many as in the past, but maybe so. It's still pretty much all over the place, and it's a cool experience to be in Rehoboth on Jazz Festival weekend. So, Holly Lane and Sure Jazz, meaning Mike McShane and myself. That's the stuffing of the Build-A-Bear. Speaking of bear, teddy bears in particular, John Ewart, a teddy bear with a clarinet and a saxophone and whatever else he brings, and just happy guy who's just loves to play. I think he's pulling away from this, but he's been a dual resident of New Orleans and Lewis, Delaware, where he lives, and big Pete Fountain fan on the clarinet and all of that. And so we had this going on, and then we had, of course, we had Holly. And I was going somewhere with that, and I have no idea what I was going to do. Well, that's right. And it didn't happen to the extent it could have. And I was sort of aware of this, but not entirely aware, and I was made more aware this year, that the long-standing tradition at Just in Time, especially like 20 years ago when there was only one festival, is that was kind of like a closing party for the festival. And a lot of the musicians would come there, and there'd be sit-ins, it'd be a big old deal, and it kind of happened that way. And there were several sit-ins. Let me see, Libby York came and sat in. Peggy Raley, one of the co-directors of True Blue, came and sat in. Somebody else sat in. John Flynn came and played piano for Holly on one of the numbers, and John and Holly have a regular thing in Rehoboth. And then Bob Diener was there. And Bob Diener was actually the first piano player, or keyboard player, to take over for Lenny. I came in after Bob Diener was there, and then excuse me. Am I done? Okay. That's been happening a little more lately, but tis the season. I always have sneezing fits. It's only a problem if I'm driving in a traffic circle. Because you have to close your eyes to sneeze. Then you don't know where you're going. Anyhow, and I think Bob was filling the gap. He lives further significantly from Rehoboth, Lewis, than I do, but he was filling the void for a while, and then I came along, and Bob Diener and I have gotten close. Bob Diener supervises the restaurant chain that includes the Stanford Grill that I play at Tuesday nights. They have music 7 nights a week. So he administers all these musicians. And we didn't get a chance to intersect. And in part because, he has a connection with Holly and Mike and John. And in part because, I'll just say it, me. He wanted to come out and hear me, be supportive and hang and everything. And so, of course, we wound up getting him to sit in. And if you look on my Facebook page, we kind of schemed something, and it was a little bit of a gag, where he said, well, if I come and sit in, I want you to run left-hand bass underneath me. Okay. And so we actually did. And I stood there, and he played like a real piano. But then, of course, you blink, and then we switch, and we do all that fun little shit. So, and he was accompanying Holly by himself because they have a thing. So all that stuff was going on. But the stuffing of the Build-A-Bear was Mike and I. And then Saturday night, we made a unique combination of musicians. One we've made once before. We got to do it again. Paul Mediri on vibes. This is in addition to Mike and I. Paul Mediri on vibes. And my connection with Paul. Of course, I was just out in Sun Valley with the guys. And part of my reconnecting with the Mediri brothers, or because it's been, over the 50 years, it's been in and out and out and in, and separate ways and together, and all that ebb and flow with the gravity just always pulling us back. Uh, was some years ago, Mike and Paul, Mike called Paul. I think I suggested it. In fact, I'm sure I did, and set it up for a gig with me in the middle. Mike and I, and then Paul on vibes, and that became a thing. We did a bunch of work, and Mike and Paul really like each other, and that really gave me a really good chance to bond with Paul again, and it's been really good. So Paul on vibes and Rue Brown. Now, if you're watching this on the Wednesday night that it runs, or the next night, and you live in proximity to the mainstay, you got to come. And if those two things are true, you may know of Rue. Rue is, and she allows her age to be used, is 91. Although she'll get on mic and say either I'm 127 years old or I'm the oldest woman in the world. Right? And she is a retired actress, performer, based up in New York, and retired to Lewis, Delaware in 1985. Got out of performing. And then she became a fan of mine. And, when our paths crossed, and she'd come to every gig I'd play down there. And I persuaded her to just open up the window. And I had to twist her arm at first. Open up the window to to that nightclub act she used to have, or the cabaret show she used to have, and pull some stuff out. And I've done a few shows with her. And she was the vocalist. Now, she's not a jazz singer. And, just simply being a vocalist is not her entire thing. But she is a tremendous entertainer, comedian, the whole package, and it works. And then, of course, she has all these followers and choir members that she directs and stuff. So the place is all full with people, her choirs that she directs and sings while she's, that's its own bag too. So all these different own bags, or distinct bags. Do I have a bag? There's a plastic one. Yeah. So all these different distinct bags are happening with the same stuffing in the bear. It's really cool. But I'm bringing up Rue because the show I'm doing Friday night at the Mainstay is going to bring a local vocalist and an actor, but he's performing primarily as a singer. His name is Brad Chairs. He's 29 years old. And he's aware of Rue. I made him aware of Rue. I had him watch a video, and he's like, wow, her delivery. I'd love to work with her someday. It's like, okay, Brad, let me see what I can do. And I had Brad booked in the show, and I called Rue. He said, hey, can I bring you on as a special guest in this show? And I didn't even get the first that sentence finished, and she's already telling me what we're going to do, right? So that go Rue. So I'm having her at the Mainstay, and it's gonna be a hoot, right? And so there was that event on Friday night, and it was a combination of Rue singing, and we did some. There's a drummer, yeah, a drummer that came and sit in, prominent drummer. Actually, two of them, but one sit-in didn't happen. I got to give Mike credit. He's got a lot to juggle down there, because he's like the one that everybody knows and the one that everybody has, tries to go through or needs to go through to get to whatever. And he's just trying to run a gig, and he's trying to, do his thing. But yeah, it was super cool. And now that I'm thinking about it, there's a definite contrast with the experience I had in Sun Valley, because although I did different things with different people in different sets, and I described some of that last week, the constant was you keep coming back to the same band. And because the Madiri band doesn't play together nearly as much as it did, decades ago, uh, and Joe and Paul, they have full-time work lives related to music, but not performing. So they're limited on what they can do anyway now. So like the band gets together, but if you have a festival where you're playing, sets on 4 consecutive days, you're like gelling, and just sort of reconnecting to the whole thing. You had that chance to do that. You had that sense of momentum. You don't have it at True Blue. You're dropping into this, and you're dropping into that, and you're dropping into this. And the special thing, and if I talk about the Rehoboth Festival again, the preview of it is this, that the circumstances just worked out, beautifully woven, that at just the right time I could bring Sharon into the band. Now, when I say I could bring, it was facilitated by what Sharon and I are doing together, and then Madiri becoming aware of it, and it was such a perfect fit in the band. And she was just loving it, and I was loving it. Everybody was loving it, and it's just like two important pieces of my world were merging, and now everybody in Madiri world, and beyond, who experienced this at the festival, it was just all enthused, and like, this is really, really cool. Sharon won herself a lot of fans last week, 2 weeks ago, and however long it was, I have no idea. And that kind of thing could not happen at True Blue. It was a different animal, and all these festivals are different. We have an annual jazz festival in Chestertown, which is even a smaller scale. Of course, Chestertown is a smaller town, and a lot of those are just one-day events. They had them multiple days, but it still wasn't anything like a Sun Valley, which is actually incredibly organized and structured. And they've been doing it for decades, and they know how to do it, and they're very, very good at it. And I'm so glad I got to go back, because it's been 15 years. But I'm going to stop talking about that, because I've already talked about all this other stuff. And I hope the Build-A-Bear analogy makes sense. And this is one of the important pieces of my world. If you saw the Facebook post on my page on the last day of the Sun Valley Festival, after I did the dedicated Blossom Deary set with Sharon, and we were both elated about the whole thing, and I said, two of the most important and treasured musical and personal paths in my life have come together here. And that was worded carefully, because not the only two. There are more than two. There are not a lot that are really like central. There are two and a half, three more. And my rapport with Mike is one of them. And I could talk to it in terms of Shore Jazz, but because of where it's really blossomed out to go the Build-A-Bear route, Shore Jazz is part of that, and the other musicians that we work with and get to accompany are part of that too. So, I just have had a couple of weeks of pure joy and sleep deprivation. It's so fun. But then personally, unrelated to music, without going into it, something, kind of all-consuming and very cool has happened now with me, or is happening. And it all started when I was out in Rehoboth, and it was should I even say this? It's like the other side of the emotional scale of when I went to the Rehoboth Festival a few years ago, and like the first day I got there, and I I knew my father was, he was in hospice, and he was in ICU, and it was getting to the end, and then he passed away the first day of the festival. The entire festival, I'm administrating everything that I'm going home to after the festival, all consuming. This is a very different circumstance, but all consuming it there, and I'm just like, what? So anyhow, the person who I referenced earlier, who's probably watching this or will at some point, you don't have to be concerned about me. I'm good. I had years ago when I was teaching students in people's homes, like when I was still living at home with my parents when I was a teenager, and, I didn't have a studio in my house. I drove to people. And eventually, I kept doing it for a while. And I had this emergency room physician, an adult student. And he would work like 18 or 36-hour shifts or something ridiculous, or 24-hour shifts or whatever. And he would have 2-hour commutes. And apparently we had our piano recital, which he played in. And he had to drive from his hospital because he had this big long shift. And he stumbles into the church where I hold the recitals and says, "Joe, who needs drugs when you've got fatigue?" Yeah. Or really, fatigue is good for creativity. Also makes you crazy. I'll pick up my cappuccino on my way to my gig tonight. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you to those of you who watch, and if you don't, channel support, totally understand. That's not for everyone. It's for a minority of people. But if you are inclined to check it out via the link you'll find in the video description, that does really help, and it helps and encourages. So thanks again. I have no idea how long this video is because I lost track. So whatever it is, I hope it's satisfactory. And now I'm off to the next thing. Blessed to live this life. Thank you. Bye.